Day 3, where we look at the third day of the story and approach an issue that is particularly relevant to the adaptation of The Name of the Rose as a television series. There are several ways to turn a novel into a screenplay. However, these ways can be divided into two main categories: planned and unplanned. Unplanned means that the screenplay is written straight away based on the novel. Planned means that the novel is broken up into its key scenes, and then they take a look at what can be cut out, and at the same time scenes are postponed. The latter, I suspect, was done for both the film The Name of the Rose and the series. We clearly see the model of the novel. The scenes are, especially in the film, shortened and moved to other places. I don't always understand why this is the way it is. Let's move on to the events of the year 1327. We've arrived at the third day of the story. Berengar has disappeared and also remains absent during the morning service. A bloody sheet is found in his cell, whereupon Alinardus repeats the prophecy of the apocalypse and insists that the third trumpet will bring death by water. While William wants to have a conversation with the Master Glacier, Azzo sits in the church and falls asleep. For quite some time, because obviously the young need more sleep than the old, who have slept so much already and will soon sleep for eternity. He then goes into the scriptorium and looks through the codex while actually watching the other monks. Meanwhile, he thinks about books and knowledge and concludes that truth should be locked away before he thinks about Benno of Uppsala and Venantius and begins to have doubts. Who owns the knowledge? Does it belong to the world? Azzo reprimands himself for these thoughts and heads to the kitchen to eat. There he meets Salvatore, who in his own way tells him the story of his life. He came from a poor family and traveled half of Europe begging before ending up in a Minorite monastery in Tuscany. Then there was a conflict between this and another monastery, at the end of which Salvatore traveled the country again and joined the pastorals. Then he reports on the anti-Semitism that was common in these times, because on their way south, they killed all the Jews they could get their hands on and took their belongings. Why the Jews? I asked Salvatore. Why not? He replied, adding that people had been hearing from the priests all their life that the Jews were the enemy of Christianity and that they were also accumulating those riches that were denied to them, poor Christians. I asked him if it wasn't rather the case that wealth was amassed by the noble lords with the help of compulsory tithes, and that the pastorals were therefore not fighting their true enemies. To which Salvatore replied that if the real enemies are too powerful, you just have to look for weaker enemies. Salvatore then ended up with the Minorites, but when they were persecuted by the Pope, he changed his habit and became a Benedictine. Eventually, he ended up in the abbey and became the cellarer's assistant. After this account, Azzo asks Salvatore if he ever met Fra Dolcino. Salvatore runs away furiously, which makes Azzo even more curious. He wants to ask Ubertine about it, but can't find him. Instead, he meets William, who is with Master Glacier Nicholas. Nicholas is trying to grind new glasses. Azzo recounts what he learned from Salvatore and admits he's confused by all the different ways of heresy. William suggests that it is important to distinguish these different ways, lest one heretic be judged for what another heretic did. The two end up in a philosophical conversation about the truth, which confuses Azzo even more. Finally, William admits that he has, just like that, deciphered the secret code of Venantius. Secretum finis Africae, manus supra idolum age primum et septimum de quartuor. Translated, this means mystery of the end of Africa. The hand over the idol act on the 1st and 7th of the 4. The words have been translated, but the meaning is not. Azzo and William then go to the abbot. He has received a message that the Pope is sending an inquisitor to be responsible for the security of the papal delegation. When his name is mentioned, William bursts out, Bernard Gui. He has made a name for himself as the Scourge of Heretics and has already brought many to the stake. Not only will this affect the dispute, it also creates time pressure. The strange events at the Abbey must be cleared before Gui arrives, otherwise he will take over the investigation. However, William hasn't got any further and complains that he's not allowed to go into the library, which everything seems to revolve around, because the dead monks and the missing Berengar have something to do with it. The abbot replies that all the monks of the abbey are involved with the library, and continues to refuse access. William then has a setback. Nicholas made a mistake when grinding the lenses for the new eyeglasses and the lenses shattered, and Berengar remains missing. William decides it may be necessary to sneak into the library again. However, he and Azzo need a way of orientation. He discusses a machine that provides orientation by a needle that is always pointing north, and a 21st century person would easily recognize it as a primitive compass. In the 14th century, however, people were not that far all along. The monk also considers the possibility of an Ariadne's threat before he thinks about the nature of the edificium. He and Azzo can deduce the rooms they saw inside from the building's exterior structure. William even figured out how to mark the rooms by using the initials of the inscriptions placed in each room. Since the two missed dinner because of their activities, Azzo seeks out Salvatore, who is currently in the stable. It becomes clear that Salvatore knows magic spells, as he claims he can make the third horse in line just as fast as the abbot's horse. When Azzo asks for something to eat, Salvatore agrees to cook Kaasschmarrn. Kaasschmarrn is a specialty made from cheese. After the meal, unbeknownst to his master, Azzo visits Ubertine in the church. From him, he finally learns the story of the heretic leader Fra Dolcino. The call Penitentia agite, which Salvatore had already used, is a corrupted abbreviation for Penitentiam agite, appropinquavit enim regnum coelorum. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Dolcino had taken up the false teaching of a burnt heretic and continued them. He gathered people around him, preached poverty and that all clergymen must die. He railed against the church and carried out robberies before he and his wife were caught and burned at the stake. Since Ubertine talks himself into a rage during his lecture about true love and lust, Azzo wants to know more and goes into the scriptorium all by himself. By chance, or providence as Azzo would say, one of the copyists has a work on heretics lying on his desk, and in it the young novice reads the details of Fra Dolcino's conviction. He is reminded of an occasion where he himself witnessed the burning of a heretic, noting that the heretic statement were turned around to suit the Inquisition. Azzo also goes into the library but quickly realizes that his head is getting dizzy, so he abandons this plan. On his way out, he passes the kitchen where he unexpectedly encounters a girl hiding there. Both are attracted to each other, and as Azzo slowly but surely breaks his vow of celibacy, he quotes the Song of Solomon. "Your graceful legs are like jewels, the work of an artist's hands. Your navel is a rounded goblet that never lacks blended wine. Your waist is a mound of wheat encircled by lilies. Your breasts are like two fawns, like twin fawns of a gazelle. Your neck is like an ivory tower. Your eyes are the pools of Heshbon by the gate of Bath Rabbim. Your nose is like the tower of Lebanon, looking toward Damascus. Your head crowns you like Mount Carmel. Your hair is like royal tapestry. The king is held captive by its tresses. How beautiful you are, and how pleasing, my love, with your delights." Overwhelmed and eroticized by the experience of physical love, Azzo falls asleep. When he wakes up again, the girl is gone. But she left a bundle in which Azzo finds a severed, bloody heart. He falls unconscious, but is woken up by William shortly thereafter. It turns out that the heart came from a slaughtered ox. Now Azzo is confessing what happened in the kitchen, and William realizes that the girl was offering love services to one of the monks for slaughterhouse waste. The Franciscan also deduces which monk is suitable for this. He must be able to maintain contacts with the village below the abbey, have access to slaughterhouse waste, and know a way into the abbey where one cannot be seen. All of this applies to Remigius, or, as William points out, also to Salvatore. The two then meet Alinados, who speaks again of the apocalypse, whereupon even William gets the idea that the murderer, inspired by the circumstances of Adelma's suicide, might in fact have arranged the other dead according to the trumpets of Revelation. So Berengar should have been found in water, but there is no water to drown in the abbey. Azzo mentions the bathhouse, which seems logical to William. Although they had searched for the missing monk that day, they probably only looked in there briefly. So the two go to the bathhouse, and indeed, in one of the tubs they find Berengar's corpse. And with this find, the report of the third day ends. I would like to pick out an interesting part of this chapter of the novel, which skillfully links the current situation with the historical situation. Salvatore tells that the pastorals, to which he belonged for a while, killed Jews and justified this with words that sound eerily familiar even to a person of the 21st century. The Jews accumulate riches that belong to the Christians. It's historically correct that this conspiracy myth, and indeed we can call it that, has been around for centuries, and it's shocking that over time it hasn't worn out and disappeared, but only had been reinforced. It must also be clearly stated that a certain anti-Semitism has been woven into the DNA of the Christian church, so to speak. Originally, the Christians were a Jewish splinter sect that held the belief that Jesus was the Messiah. However, according to the Jewish interpretation, this would have meant that the end of the world and the kingdom of God was near. The early Christians did indeed expect the end times to begin while they were still alive, or at least within a few generations. Since the other Jewish churches rejected this idea, however, they were regarded as enemies of the Messiah, who followed false teaching and who appropriated the Holy Scriptures, which actually belonged to the Christians. After all, the entire works of what Christians call the Old Testament came from the Tanakh of the Jews. the Christian Church isolated itself more and more from its Jewish roots and referred to other Jews as book robbers. Later, when the end of the world had still not come and Christianity had transitioned from an end-time sect to a religion, it was insisted that it was a Jewish priest, Caiaphas, who tricked Pontius Pilate into executing Jesus. This branded the Jews as Christ murderers, although one could argue very philosophically whether the condemnation and execution of Jesus did not follow a plan. After all, Christians claim that everything happened as it was preordained, and everyone involved consequently only took up what was intended for him by a higher power. The Jews then served as a cheap projection surface. If an illness broke out and people who didn't yet know anything about pathogens could not explain it, the Jews must have poisoned the well. The Jews were said to kidnap children and use them in cruel rituals. I would like to recall to an earlier episode in this series where Ubertine tells William this horror story and links it to a Christian splinter group, and it recalls Salvatore's words that one must look for weaker enemies when the true enemies are too powerful. This is exactly what is done here, namely, instead of looking for the real causes of social injustices, which can be time-consuming, difficult and very tiring, one prefers to take someone who can be personified as evil and hated. Even the Crusades, which were specifically called to liberate Jerusalem from the Muslims, although this was a propaganda from a pope who was actually being asked for help on a different matter, but that's a story for another time. The first victims of the Crusades were not Muslims in the Middle East who were invaded by the Crusaders, but Jews living in the heart of Europe. Spurred on by local church leaders who embellished Pope Urban II's speech with a call for a crusade, they were ready to kill all enemy of Christianity. Ordinary citizens, unable to make the trip to Jerusalem to fight Muslims, took the so-called enemies who were within reach and, true to the Crusades' motto, secure your place in heaven by sending a pagan to hell, they set off terrible pogroms that couldn't be stopped even when other priests tried to defend the Jews. The myth persists to this day, and we've only recently experienced it and continue to experience it when so-called Jewish conspirators like George Soros are blamed for the pandemic, or the Jewish blood of some heads of states is mentioned to discredit them as part of a conspiracy. Yes, even the completely idiotic statement that Hitler himself was, at least in part, of Jewish descent, which means that the crime of the National Socialists were also parts of the plan of the Jewish world conspiracy, was heard not too long ago. Through Salvatore, Eco confronts us with this way of thinking and also with the fact that spiritual arsonists should not be downplayed. No priest expressly asked the pastoral to kill these Jews. It was enough to tell the horror stories about the money-grabbing Jews. The pastorals themselves took action. Salvatore's reaction also shows a problem that one has with today's conspiracy mongers. Confronted with the truth, he just waves it off. He doesn't want to deal with the real causes of poverty or even rebel against greedy princes. He wants a simple, quick fix. And he and his friends got away with it, at least for the time being, because nobody was stopping them and nobody wanted to associate with the Jews. From this historical excursus, we come to the adaptation of the novel. Let's begin with the movie. Most of the scenes were not adapted. Important things such as deciphering the secret code are put at another place. William already explained the exclamation penitentia agite when they met Salvatore for the first time, but only that it is a corruption of penitentiam agite without translating the Latin, and that Salvatore used to be a heretic. We do not learn more about his life story. Also, it is not William and Azzo who find Berengar's corpse, but Severin. The two monks do not discover a bloody sheet in Berengar's cell, but a multi-tailed whip which Berengar used to punish himself for his sins on the first night. Since the Master Glacier isn't present in the film version, he's not trying to fabricate new eyeglasses for William. Azzo does also not sneak into the library on his own, and about the encounter with the girl, we'll come to it in a minute. The announcement that Bernard Gouy will accompany the papal delegation is well received by the abbot, who even forbids William to investigate further and hands the investigation over to the inquisitor, something he's determined to prevent in the novel and in the series. That is the scene I described earlier, in which Michael Lonsdale as abbot comes across as a James Bond villain. When he is shown the parchment with the secret writing, he even burns it and says it is no longer allowed to be discussed. In the series, many of the scenes appear in one form or another, but some of them have been massively changed. Salvatore tells his life story, but it goes like this. As a misshaped human being, he was kept as an oddity by a noble family, so that they could laugh at him. In one scene, he was shown crawling as a dog on a leash. At that moment, Fra Dolcino and his band arrive. They kidnap a son of the noble family, kill a priest, and Remigius, who is already a part of Dolcino's gang, frees Salvatore and takes him away, so that the two end up in the abbey. There, Salvatore is in charge of the abbey's papermaking, which will play a role later in the series. William also explains the exclamation penitentia agite when Azzon hears the word repeatedly, and also translates it as do penance. However, Jorge tells Azzo the story of Fra Dolcino. As for William's eyeglasses, the series did even a little better research. When the monk complained to Master Glacier Nicholas that he has lost his glasses, he has an idea. He asks if Nicholas has a barrel. The Master Glacier affirms this, and William asks him to cut off a piece and grind it. Beryl is a crystal that is easy to grind, and the first eyeglasses were actually made from it. The German word for glasses, Brille, is even derived from beryl. Also in the series, Azzo does not sneak into the library alone, but he goes to the scriptorium to read a book about heretics, where he meets Jorge. The bloody sheet in Berengar's cell was found by William and Azzo before, when the sinful monk had not yet disappeared. In the conversation in which he describes meeting Adelmus in the cemetery, William confronts Berengar with the sheet, whereupon Berengar claims he does not know where the blood came from. That's a lie, of course, and it's also not entirely clear to me why the two scenes that are actually separate, the conversation with Berengar and the finding of the sheath, were combined into one. Of course, Berengar has to lie at that point, because admitting that it was he who put Venantius in the vat of pig's blood would already reveal too much of the further plot. Now we come to one of the central elements of the story, the girl. In the novel, Azzo meets her quite unexpectedly and as described above. The film expands on that a bit. Here, Azzo catches a glimpse of the girl beforehand as he and William climb around the slopes below the monastery to investigate Adelmus' death. The two witness how the abbey disposes their kitchen waste and how people from the village are fighting for it. This is prompting William to cynically remark on the generous gifts of the church. One of the villagers fighting for the kitchen waste is the girl, and this is the first time Azzo sees her. Azzo and the girl see each other next time when they meet in the kitchen in the monastery, but the scene takes place at a different point. Azzo does not go into the kitchen because he was secretly in the library by himself, but in the scriptorium with William, where William's eyeglasses were stolen. While looking for the thief, William and Azzo separate, and the novice goes into the kitchen because the door is open and the light is on. It is also clear from the scene that it is Remigius who has led the girl into the abbey to spend a little time with her. As in the novel, the girl and Azzo have sex, but without Azzo quoting the Song of Solomon. At the same time, William interviews Salvatore, whom he surprised while hunting rats in the cemetery, which I've already reported. As in the novel, the girl just disappears, leaving behind Azzo, who finds the bundle she left there and unpacks an ox heart. William also deduces that the girl offered love services in exchange for slaughterhouse waste. However, the conversation about love between him and Azzo only takes place later in the cell of the two. Interestingly, William doesn't want Azzo to confess to him, but rather tell the story as a friend. A little later, Azzo even secretly goes into the village and watches the girl and her family in their dirty hut. Then there's the series. What can I say? The role of the girl has been massively expanded and a second female role has been added. I understand the intention, but the whole thing is going wrong in my impression. First things first, in the series, the girl is not a resident of the village below the abbey. There is no village at all, although we see people coming to the monastery to pay their tithes. And let's call the girl the Rose from now on, because otherwise it will be strange. The Rose meets William and Azzo while they are still on their way to the abbey. Fleeing the war between the papal and imperial troops, she speaks a language Azzo does not understand. William explains it's Occitan, and in fact care was taken in the production of the series to ensure that the words spoken by the Rose were authentically written in that language. She follows the two monks and settles down in the forest below the monastery. However, it is not entirely clear what she lives on. In any case, she does not go to the monastery like her role model in the novel to receive slaughterhouse waste for charity or love services. Azzo secretly leaves the monastery several times to meet with her, bringing her food. They get closer little by little until they finally have sex. Azzo even tells her his name once, but she doesn't respond. Since she later calls him Azzo, we know that she understood him. But why didn't she respond and tell Azzo her name? Yes, I know, because that would have ruined the ending of the story and its title. But the way the plot plays out, it's plain illogical. Azzo doesn't ask either. Another logical error. Azzo reports that it's the end of November and there's snow in the abbey in the series. And also according to Azzo, it takes him an hour to reach the forest where the Rose has settled. And spring seems to be reigning there, and even in Italy that is not possible. On top of that, Azzo takes an hour's walk downhill to reach the Rose. That means he needs at least an hour to get back to the abbey. If you add the time he and the Rose spend together, Azzo is absent for at least 3 hours a day. William has a suspicion about what's going on, but what about the other monks in the abbey? Doesn't anyone notice that William's novice is just gone for a few hours a day? In addition, because life in an abbey is very strictly regulated, and it is certainly noticeable when Azzo regularly misses services. The intention behind everything is clear. It's about expanding the role of the Rose. Unfortunately, a lot of logical mistakes have been made here, and there will be a few more to come. Another point, when I talked about how the Middle Ages are portrayed in film and series, I called it dirty and tangible in the film, while in the series it was rather clean. This is particularly noticeable with the Rose. In the film she wears simple, ragged clothes, has matted hair and dirty skin. Her actress, by the way, is Valentina Vargas, who was born in Chile but first pursued her acting career in France. In the series, portrayed by Nina Fortaras, an Italian actress of Greek descent who has mainly starred in Italian productions so far, She wears a long, neat robe, is clean and has her hair done. Even if her background changed from a girl living in poverty to a war fugitive after living in the forest for a few days, she should look different and a little dirty. And her behavior is also strange and sometimes just serves to initiate the next events of the story. Once, for example, she roams the surrounding fields and dances to herself. She is then watched by Salvatore, who wants the puella, as he says, for himself. Now let's move on to the other female role, invented just for the series. Anna, the daughter of heretic leader Fra Dolcino, portrayed by Italian actress Greta Scarano. In several flashbacks, we slowly learn her whole story, which I want to reproduce here chronologically, also for the sake of better understanding. Remigius was commissioned by Margherita, Dolcino's companion, to look after their daughter Anna should anything happen. Bernagui then managed to track down the Dolcinians and had the leader and Margherita burned at the stake. Remigius and Anna were among the spectators at the time. Anna was still a child. When she was old enough, Remigius moved on while Anna settled down and started a family in Pietranera in northern Italy. On the way to the abbey, Bernagui now passes by Pietranera. Since he knows the city as a heretical nest, he sets an example and kills the inhabitants. This is where the sentence spoken by the abbot in the novel is said by Gui. How do we distinguish heretics from true Christians? We kill them all. God will recognize his own. Anna escapes as she's out hunting in the forest at the time. She's a very good archer. Since her husband and child are among the dead, she swears revenge and pursues Bernagui's entourage. When he stops at a river, she waits for the inquisitor but misses him with her arrow. Gui can alert his guards. In a duel with one of the knights, Anna is wounded. Despite this, she continues to follow Gui until finally, still injured, she ends up in the forest below the abbey, where she meets the Rose. The Rose has a knowledge in medicinal herbs and takes care of Anna's wounds. There's also a meeting between Anna and Azzo. The latter thinks it's wiser not to say anything in the abbey. Anna will continue to intervene in the plot, but more will be said about that later. At the time that Azzo and the Rose are having their love time, Anna is curing her wounds. Again, I understand the intention. If it wasn't clear from the start, it must have become clear pretty quickly that the Rose's role couldn't be expanded too much. Therefore, a second female character was created for the story. I mean, the role of the Rose has already been expanded to such an extent that it squeaks. Anna was written to... well, what exactly? Does the story need a character who makes it clear that Bernagui is a scheming and actually diabolical inquisitor who thinks he's a tool of God? No. It also doesn't need a character who undertakes a vendetta against Gui, because it's clear from the outset that this can only happen within very narrow limits without disturbing the actual plot of the story too much. It was the will to introduce a strong female character. Unfortunately, Anna is completely out of the ordinary. As I said before, she looks like a character from a fantasy story who got lost in a medieval drama. And if you want to introduce such a character, a little more research would have been appropriate. Even William, who is an extremely modern figure, repeatedly refers in his speeches to texts and people that he might have known as a 14th century man. Anna is a very good archer who is also good at hand-to-hand combat. However, since she's portrayed in the series as an ordinary citizen of a town, it is unlikely that she would have owned a bow, which would have been extremely expensive. The training that would have been necessary to be able to shoot as well as her is on top of that. Before I finish, however, I have to say that I would have preferred to have left the character of Anna entirely out of the story. I can only repeat what I already suspected. One reason for the additions to the plot was, in my impression, the fact that the rhythm of the plot was changed, so there was a suitable cliffhanger at the end of each episode. So far, the added storyline has tended to run parallel to what was taken directly from the book. Now, in the beginning it was only Azzo interacting directly with the Rose. Then, with Salvatore, a second factor came along. And now Anna will also have direct influence on the main story. We will see that next time.